Hey everyone, and welcome to this special edition of the Seriously Risky Business podcast. My name's Patrick Gray. Now, normally in Seriously Risky Business, you'll hear Tom Buren and I talking about his newsletter. His newsletter, of course, is the Seriously Risky Business newsletter that you can find at risky.biz. But this week we're doing something a little different. A couple of weeks ago during RSA week, I recorded this interview live from in front of an audience from an event being held by Decibel, which is the VC firm that we partner with here at Risky Business Media. And we brought together a couple of fantastic guests to have really a conversation about offensive cyber and what's happening with US government intelligence agencies in the age of the Trump White House. So we have with us Rob Joyce, who most recently was the cybersecurity director at NSA, but prior to that, he'd run tailored access operations there. He even served in the first Trump administration as the president's advisor on cyber, working in the White House. Terrifically knowledgeable guy. And our other guest for this recording is Andy Boyd, and Andy ran the Center for Cyber Intelligence at CIA. He's out of there now, so they're both formers, but who better to talk to about all of these topics, because now that they're not in the government anymore, in government jobs anymore, they have a bit more freedom to talk about all of this stuff. So the topics we cover is everything from Vault Typhoon and how the US should respond, where AI fits into the intelligence world and where all of that's going. But I'm going to drop you in here to the conversation where we talk about staffing levels. Oh, before I do, we want to say a big thanks to this week's Seriously Risky Business sponsor, which is Corelight. Corelight make a terrific network security sensor, and they're the industry standard, terrific technology. But I'll drop you in here where I started off by talking to Andy and Rob really about how all of these changes in Washington are affecting things like staffing levels at agencies like NSA and CIA. Enjoy.
The thing I'd point out is, there is so many big visible moves throughout the government, whether it is, Elon with the chainsaw, parading around talking about the government cuts, down to the removal of the director NSA and the deputy director of NSA. There are very real things happening. Now, the good news is it doesn't progress that much farther down into NSA, but sister agency CISA, the best word I can use is eviscerated, right? Very, very talented people, big programs cut in major ways. And then people inside the government who are not in those places being forced to vacate, they're looking around and saying, well, maybe I better look and figure out my options before it does happen to me. So, I still mentor and talk to a bunch of people, and I'm telling them, the nation needs you. And so, keep your head down, do the important work of the government, do your job and get through this. And, hopefully we have a lot of people stay with that. But I know just from friends and colleagues that are announcing their departures, we're losing good, talented people. And that just hurts me kind of in the core of my being.
Well, there are a lot of people eyeing the exits. I mean, something I heard recently is, of course, when you want to depart an organization like NSA and you want a resume that you can publish, quite often that will need to be reviewed. And there is a backlog currently for that review process for two reasons. First of all, due to the people who do that work actually no longer being there. And second of all, the number of people who are updating their LinkedIn, basically. Andy, I want to get your perspective on this as well. We've just heard from Rob that the real cuts seem to be at CISA and the intelligence community. It's more a case of maybe some changes around leadership and that causing people to spontaneously kind of eye the exits. Does that vibe with your understanding of what's happening as well?
That vibe's my understanding of the other agencies. My own, my former agency, CIA, hasn't had any forced departures at the leadership level, but we do have a voluntary early retirement program, and the windows for that open up periodically, and there's going to be another window that opens up this summer. And I know of at least half a dozen senior leaders that I put into place when I was running the Center for Cyber Intelligence. and they're looking to leave, to take that voluntary early retirement, because otherwise they'd have to wait several years to get to that place in retirement. And they're really quality people. They're the kind of people that would frankly be qualified to take my former job as director for the Center for Cyber Intelligence in a couple of years. And it like Rob, it's very disappointing that that's happening. That being said, John Ratcliffe, the director of CIA, made it very clear in his confirmation testimony in the Senate that he was, as director, if he was confirmed, he was going to double down on cyber operations. And in general, that is the atmosphere in CIA, that people are going to be taking cyber operations quite seriously, that it's an enterprise function across the intel community. What I would caution leaders is you can't start eating your seed corn, these senior leaders that are going to be running entire enterprise apparatus, if that is your actual operational goal.
Yeah, and herein lies a bit of a contradiction, right? Because what we saw in the Trump term 1 was a president and a White House that was much more comfortable exercising state power through cyber means than the administrations that came before it or the one that came after it. So we've got this situation where the White House is sort of performing actions where they want to, get rid of people, clear the decks. I mean, there's this new sort of Doge for the intelligence community thing being spun up by Tulsi Gabbard. All in all, it's looking like not as comfortable a workplace as it was, but at the same time, they're going to start asking these agencies to do more. Rob, let's bring you in on that. Is it the case that reputation of Trump being sort of, pro-offense, and letting people do fun stuff, is that a reputation that you think is accurate?
I do believe there's the intent, right? As you talk to both the people who have moved into positions already and those who are nominated, there's a common theme of, we have not done enough offensively, and there's a desire to enable offensive cyber operations in this administration. It's a clear talking point.
I guess we did see, what was that? There was that DOD policy. I can't remember the acronym. You'll tell me.
NSPM 13.
NSPM 13. And of course, this was
NSPM 21 and all the related ones. So.
Yeah, so for those who are unfamiliar, during Trump's first term, he made changes to, I guess, would you call that the rules of engagement for cyber, or the boundaries around what's...
It was streamlining. Before that change, there was a lot of interagency bureaucracy surrounding offensive cyber operations. Correct. And the kind of the feeling was everybody got a veto, and so very few things made it all the way up the stack and got out with a yes. And NSPM 13 gave a little bit more mission type orders, meaning you talk about what the end goals were, you define some left and right boundaries, that gets pre-coordinated, and then the Title 10 actors in cybercom would then be able to do a campaign based around that approval. And it was better. It still is not, weapons free that I think some would want, and that's what I would expect. Some of the discussion going on right now is how do we unencumber and give more commanders intent to the execution arms, and then let them within a certain predefined set of boundaries be much more agile.
What I would just add, I think from a grand strategy perspective, the new administration has been pretty clear what their national security goals are, a significant focus on China, a pivoting of some resources to countering the cartels and the fentanyl drug problem, especially on the southern border. That is an intelligence problem as much as it is a law enforcement problem. Continuing our negotiations with the Iranians, but also having various levers of power to use. What I would say is sometimes there's a translation problem between that grand strategy and how to operationalize intent. And what I do think, and a lot of folks, I think, folks like Rob and I who are retired but still in the community in certain ways, we'll be spending, and frankly in conversations here at our RSA, is sort of explaining how those tools work and what is within the realm of the possible in cyber operations and what is not within the realm of the possible. cyber operations are not a panacea for a lack of a concrete national security policy. You have to actually apply them like you'd apply any other tool of national power. And I do think the administration hasn't quite decided how they're going to operationalize offensive cyber beyond information collection and intelligence collection. So.
Yeah, I mean, that said, what I find really interesting about the times when Trump is in the White House is it drives home this sort of new way of understanding cyber, which is where it connects to politics and where it connects to state power. Okay. Because you've got the cautious approach, and, indeed before those changes, before, to NSPM 13, you would have a situation where the State Department would say, no, we're not going to do this because, it was very much like, how do we maintain the status quo? How do we balance things, right? Whereas you come in with a more aggressive political mindset and it sort of changes the, what you're actually trying to achieve, to your point, Andy, right? And what can realistically be expected to be achieved. But that can also change, right? So to what degree do you think that the politics here could actually change the reality of what's possible? Because I feel like there's probably a bit more wiggle room there than people quite realize. Just look at what North Korea gets up to, for example, right? That's state cyber power being used to steal vast amounts of cryptocurrency. Now, I'm not expecting that the United States government is going to start behaving like North Korea, but indeed you look at China, you look at Russia, you look at the sorts of things that they do, and you look at how constrained the United States is by comparison. Surely there is, the spectrum of what's possible here is pretty wide.
So I'll list a bunch of things that we certainly will not do. You talk about stealing cryptocurrency to fund WMD programs in North Korea. Yes, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do disinformation operations or hacking into political parties to steal information to inform whatever it is that the Russians tend to do. We're also not going to be stealing intellectual property across every imaginable corner of the defense industrial base like the Chinese do. But what we will do is I think again, this is my educated guess, is take our tools, operationalize them, and no offense to my State Department friends, but put them under the command of the geographic commander, be it Indo-PACOM, be it the NATO commander, European Command, or CENTCOM for whatever the mission may be. And then the execution of that will be by Cyber Command. But again, it'll be considered a operation short of war, but under the command of a military element where the State Department is aware of it, but to your point, Pat, probably won't have a veto.
I mean, I'm going to actually push back on you a little bit there. You say you won't steal cryptocurrency to fund WMDs. Would you steal cryptocurrency from cartels to inconvenience their operations? Is that something that could happen? You say you won't steal.
Yes.
Exactly. You say you won't steal intellectual property from the defense industrial base. I would hazard a guess that some of Rob's former colleagues are crawling all over the networks at this very moment of Chinese defense contractors looking for ideas that American R&D teams might have missed. So, we often talk about certain things having Chinese characteristics, right? That's the euphemism. I mean, it's almost like we could have similar sorts of operations, but with American characteristics. And, what I've just described there is not, really at a conceptual level outrageous. So is this what we can expect in the future? Maybe we get Rob to chime in on this one.
Yeah, I do think the measuring stick will change, right? But there are still core American values, and I think that's what Andy was going to. Yes, there is an intent to gather intelligence about the military capabilities of China, Russia, and others. The difference is that those ideas for understanding their capabilities fuel things like the ability, the defensive capabilities we're going to build, right? It doesn't go into the intellectual theft and the productization of new profit centers for companies operating out of the U.S., right? There is just that subtle difference. But I do think you're right, Pat, that the rules change and things become freer, and you get to be more creative in that operational space. I think that's going to be encouraged.
On the cryptocurrency front, yeah, I mean, there's a whole variety of things, but wouldn't use the word stealing, because that would mean we were trying to profit off of whatever the cryptocurrency Bitcoin.
I know that you would much prefer, because Americans love euphemisms, right? You would love to use a word like appropriating.
I think it would just be, I think the appropriate word would be disrupting the cartel's ability to make money, which is at the end of the day, as a criminal enterprise, what they do. And if we disrupt that, wherever that cryptocurrency goes, and it's not going to go to the U.S. Treasury, it is a disruption of that operation.
To see the strategic Bitcoin reserve enhanced, right? And you may see that.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, cryptocurrency is used by transnational criminal organizations. I'd hazard a guess that if you added it all up, there's probably a fair bit of Bitcoin in that cartel ecosystem.
You know, I joke about that, but it happens today. You know, U.S. law enforcement seizes property all the time from from criminal activities. What they don't usually do is reach out into other sovereign nations to grab those assets. But in the digital world, you know, when you're talking cryptocurrency and things, that could be an operationally viable idea, right? We do sanction and seize bank accounts. We freeze bank accounts. So I think in the crypto world, I would very much imagine those kind of things would be, at the very least, talked about in the operational discussions.
I mean, the thing that I'm finding hilarious here is there's probably some people at Cyber Command who are reading all of the incident response reports, based off what North Korean actors have done, trying to pick up some tricks, right, for for how to do this sort of thing. I guess I got a question on the cartel stuff, right, which is, this is I guess there are some similarities between the cartel networks of people and the technology that allows them to communicate and conduct their businesses. There is a little bit of a difference between, a little bit of a similarity, between the cartels and terrorist organizations, in that they're not states, right? They often will have people whose job it is to try to protect them, to try to, stand up something resembling, operational security procedures and ways of doing things. But it doesn't seem to hold up very well, right? Like, we can say that by looking at how various, terrorism networks were sort of intercepted. There was a lot, very easy collection on them, and a lot of disruption operations as well. I'd imagine that for people inside your former agencies, I hope this doesn't come out sounding wrong, but I'm guessing that this sort of gig would be fun, right? Like, if you're tasked with going after the cartels, it's like fish in a barrel kind of thing. Would you agree with that? Andy, we'll start with you.
I wouldn't consider it fish in a barrel, and I don't know if I'd say they're excited. I mean, this is the way the intelligence community works. The president and his administration set the policy and the priorities. It was made clear on January 20th that fighting the cartels would be a priority for law enforcement, and then ipso facto, the intelligence community had to get in line and support that. And so my former colleagues are supporting that enthusiastically, because that is their mission. I would say, at least in communications and certain behavior patterns and how one, and I use this word loosely, we don't have lethal authorities on the cartels. It's a law enforcement issue, but hunting these folks is not dissimilar from the counterterrorism fight. The only major issue, and again, this is where the intel community plays a supporting role, and law enforcement is in the lead. A major portion of infrastructure that's associated with the cartels is actually in the United States. And that was very, very different from the fight against Al-Qaeda or ISIS or any of the other designated terrorist organizations. Now, the cartels have been designated in certain ways as terrorist organizations, which changes a whole array of things on how we can apply our tools of national security against them, which is a good thing. But I think it's going to, at least be in the beginning, it's going to be akin to the beginning of the CT war post 9/11, and a lot of the same tools will be applied. It will not be fish in a barrel. These guys know what they're doing, and they have huge business enterprises, and they're sub-state actors. They're not. You're right to point out that they're state actors, but they're something more than just a criminal enterprise. I mean, they are sub-state actors that control entire states in Mexico. And again, that's not unlike the Taliban, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda at their peak.
I'm thinking back to the Snowden leaks of, when was that, 2013, and some of the most interesting stuff that came out. I mean, obviously I have issues with the way that Ed Snowden framed a lot of the material that he leaked, because I don't think he really truly understood most of it, if I'm honest. But there was some very interesting material in there that showed that DEA actually had a much more developed SIGINT capability and sort of authorities around that stuff than people expected. How much are we expecting the intelligence around these groups to be enhanced by bringing in, say, NSA into the mix? This is probably a good question for you, Rob. I mean, wasn't it the case that, the United States government through the DEA already had good collection on these organizations? Like, what else are they going to learn?
Yeah, I'm going to leave that to Andy.
That's great. I love it when Rob lets me comment on NSA. I mean, I'll go back to the comment I made before. I mean, the national intelligence collection agencies, be it CIA, NSA, NGA, and other supporting organizations. I mean, if the President of the United States asks us to pivot and reprioritize and have the cartels, the fentanyl smugglers become one of those priorities, we are going to pivot resources, whether it's human resources, SIGINT resources, broader cyber collection, and that's just the way it works. And the intel community is a supporting actor in that. Again, this is a law enforcement problem set, but we will bring all the tools of national power in the context of the intelligence community to that problem set, because we're directed by the National Command Authority to do so.
I mean, it seems very clear what you're saying is the difference here is going to be scale, priority, resources, that sort of thing. And it is very interesting what you said about them having that infrastructure within the borders of the United States, because, you might find that by doing, treating them as a high priority, you're going to learn a lot about their activities in the United States that might not already be known, I guess, by authorities. That's the idea, isn't it?
Yeah, but therein is the rub for the NSA capabilities. It is a foreign intelligence capability, so I can't see that crossing the border. It's going to inform the overseas elements of them and the activity that starts and originates outside the U.S.
Well, I'd imagine a lot of the information that would be actionable would be stored on systems outside of the United States, which would make it fair game, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so look, let's have a bit of a chat. I mean, I guess we've kind of touched on this already, but one of the things in our notes that we prepped for this session was to sort of talk about active defense, active offense, what's sort of changing there. I mean, active defense is, I guess, a bit of a euphemism, isn't it? I mean, it's about when you discover, attacker infrastructure targeting, interests in the United States, you go and then disrupt that attacker infrastructure. This was something that was, I guess, kind of regarded as a controversial thing maybe 10 years ago. I feel like this isn't even a discussion anymore, because it's just an accepted part of how we do business. I mean, to what degree do you agree with that, Rob?
Yeah, I think the concept has matured. People understand. It's easy to get a visual, If you are a soccer or football team, you don't let the opposing team kick on your goal over and over and over again. You want to try to drive that ball downfield and shoot on their goal too. So the active defense is the idea that we're going to challenge them and put friction into those operations so that they don't just get continual tries to get the goal. I think where the gap is today is there's a huge communication and lexicon gap amongst the community as we talk about more offense, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and even the term active defense means different things to different people. So talking to policymakers, executive branch, and people in the operations, there's not clarity about what more offense means. Is it going after the the large botnets that are enabling activity into the U.S. Well, great, you tear those down. How long and how much impact does that have? Today, not so much. Those are pretty ephemeral. You can spin them back up. Are you going at the jump server that the data moved to when it came out of your organization? Great. What if that is, an open share in a company that's abroad? Are you allowed to burn that all down? How specific do you need to be? There are certainly folks in the political realm who pound on the table and say, I want the lights to go out in Beijing and Moscow so that they feel the same sense of angst and urgency, and they're afraid to come at us. And is that something you want to take on? Are you willing to cross that Rubicon? And I think one of the questions I have is, it feels a bit like we're covered in gasoline and starting a match throwing fight. And so where do you want to set these lines, for what end and what outcome? And I think the most important thing as we enter these debates is just to talk through and game out, who is the actor that's doing it? Is it private? Is it inherently governmental? Is it a mix? And what are the roles? What are the inbounds and out of bounds at each step as you define defense, the active defense, and then offense? And then what's inbounds and out of bounds as you consider offensive activity? Is it against infrastructure? Is it against the operational servers of an entity, or is it into the critical infrastructure of another country? And we frankly don't have clarity on what everybody means, and we do talk past each other a lot.
It's pretty clear what you're referring to there, at least in part, is stuff like Volt Typhoon, right? So for those who are unfamiliar in the audience, Volt Typhoon is a campaign being conducted by someone working at the behest of the Chinese state to pre-position these attackers inside US critical infrastructure and infrastructure that is important to American interests outside of the United States. Indeed, it's a campaign that is targeting critical infrastructure here in Australia or all around Asia Pacific. Now, you said, well, are we dousing ourselves in kerosene or gasoline and then starting a match fight? I mean, I'd sort of argue that the people pouring the flammable liquids here are probably the Chinese, right? So there is this. I think policymakers, to a degree, are a little bit stuck in how to respond to this. We heard comments from.
The point I really wanted to make was, are we prepared to do the defense as we ratchet up the offense?
Yes. Now this is where it gets very interesting, right? So we recently heard from Senator Mark Warner, some comments he made recently, which is, well, we should be doing the same thing to China. And we reported on those comments, and I had some mail come in from a listener who said, look, I work securing critical infrastructure in the United States, and we are not ready. Quite to your point, Rob, we are not ready for this fight. So if we do escalate that way, but then again, I mean, we're already in a situation where attackers are pre-positioning into that infrastructure. So Andy, I'll ask you first, and then I of course want to get your opinion on this, Rob. But as a matter of policy, what should the response to something like that be like? Because it doesn't seem like anything that we've tried so far has managed to put a dent in it or slow it down.
Yeah, and so I mean, I would agree with Rob's comments on this. There are conversations happening in Washington and sidebar conversations here in RSA between private sector company leaders, nominees to positions in the federal government, White House officials, DHS officials and whatnot, about how we put together a strategy on defense, on active defense, and on the far right of that scale, actually offensive cyber operations. And I think as a community we're going to coalesce around that strategy and probably come to the realization that shutting off the lights in whatever country, or doing exactly as Senator Warner made reference, doing exactly what the Chinese have done to us in Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon, I think we'll come to the conclusion that that's probably not the best approach. Likewise, some of our private sector friends that are attending RSA currently, they have desire to hack back, so to speak, and the lexicon. What does that hack back mean? I really don't, and they don't have the authorities to do it, overseas, because that's inherently government activity. I don't think we'd ever get to the point where we authorize medium-sized, large companies to basically take their red teaming tools and start hacking away at Beijing. I just don't think we'll do that. But what we will do, I think, is empower companies that have understanding of vulnerability research and what collectively we would call offensive cyber tools to, under the authorities of, be it the intel community, under DoD, under law enforcement, to augment our capabilities on the active defense and offensive cyber side so that we can at least approach the hundreds of thousands of folks that the Chinese apply to these problems, affiliates of the MSS, affiliates of the People's Liberation Army and whatnot. But I think that's going to take several years, but we first have to coalesce around a strategy, and that conversation is happening.
So I guess what you're saying is if you fight fire with fire, like basically everybody's just going to get burned to a crisp.
Yeah, so Pat, I do believe offense is part of the answer. My basic belief is we need to be more muscular in all elements of imposing costs and response. I don't think we've had enough freedom in the offensive space, but I also think that we haven't done a good job on defense. We also haven't really leaned in on the diplomatic levers, the tariff levers, some of the sanctions levers, and a whole array of tools that are tools of statecraft. We've done each of them to some extent, but we have not really, in a forceful way, applied those to the point where other countries kind of take the step back and go, wow, they are really serious. We better stop. And I also make the distinction, we're talking Volt Typhoon a bunch here, right? That pre-positioning for destructive effect, the strapping of digital explosives to our virtual infrastructure, right? That's beyond the pale. We've got to convince them that that is not in their interests to undertake those operations. The Salt Typhoon, where they got into our telcos, that's embarrassing to us, right? That's an intelligence success for them and failure for us. But you don't convince these other nations to stop digitally spying. I don't see that going away, but I absolutely think that as we turn the dials on the response for the pre-positioning, 1 to 10, we've done 2s and 3s. We need to get to 9, 10, and 11 across multiple settings and multiple tools so that they get the message that it is not in their benefit to undertake this. It's more cost than value.
And Pat, you and I have talked about on a previous show about the tools of coercive diplomacy. I mean, that would be an operation short of war, but it would be coercive diplomacy to change whatever nation state actor we're talking about to change their behavior. And a much more mundane example than Volt Typhoon, the Iranian government hacked water treatment or water transportation, water treatment plants in a number of states last year. I would argue if they did that again, a similar level of a cyber attack against the Iranians in the vein of a coercive diplomacy move would make a lot of sense. I think the Volt Typhoon, to Rob's point, turning it up to 11, I mean, that we would have to do a lot of operational thinking and how it would nest in with the rest of our relationship with the Chinese before we pulled that trigger.
Well, that was something I was thinking as Rob was speaking there when he brought tariffs into it, which is one of the ways that the United States has been driving with the handbrake on a little bit vis-a-vis its response to all of this, is the high level of interdependence between the Chinese and American economies. And with everything that's happening right now, it looks like that interdependence is going through some changes, shall we say. So who knows what sort of opportunities that brings with all of this. But look, let's move on to another topic now. And one thing that we wanted to touch on with you is AI, right? And how AI is sort of, possibly changing the game in the cyber domain from a sort of, I see a military perspective. Rob, before we during the preparation for this session, we had a document. I put some notes in. I thought, well, I would imagine one thing that would be very useful for an organization that does a lot of signals collection is translation. So we know after 9/11, there was this huge push to get Arabic translators into agencies like NSA and FBI because they just didn't have enough of them. They had some, but all of a sudden, tasking priorities changed. There's a volume of material coming in that needed to be translated. So I would have thought that would be useful, but as I said to you, NSA probably has already had that capability for a while because it's so important. And indeed, you pointed me to some public resources that said that, yes, this is something that NSA has had for the past 10 years. So the question becomes, where does AI plug in and fit into this whole, cyber domain?
Yeah, so our research organization has talked about, AI and some of the history of use inside NSA, and one of the most powerful use cases was machine translation. Not to the point where it replaced our human analysts, but it curated the workloads. It moved interesting things to the top of their queue so that they would go through it first. I do see that that is the general philosophy, at least in my history, is those that use AI outperform those who don't. And so you're looking at those accelerants. And yes, there's in the history of hacking, there's always been script kiddies, right? People that don't understand but can run somebody else's tool and get an effect. But the really powerful people understand the theory, the execution, and then they have that tool that they can play like a magical instrument and produce beautiful music. And that's where I see AI augmenting people who have a base level of skill and accelerating them. And what you get is speed and quantity combined with the expertise and imagination of the good people who can use it.
I mean, I was in Sydney last week just for a week off with my family. I had dinner with a friend down there who is, does not work in cyber. But it's interesting what you say, because that came up in my conversation with him, where he's restarting a business that he found too difficult to run. It involves sort of events and webinars and whatnot. Previously the workload was just too high, and now he finds that by using AI tools, he can run this business as one person, right? So this idea that it's this incredible sort of efficiency and productivity tool definitely vibes with my understanding. But Andy, obviously you've worked in this space for a long time as well. Where do you think the opportunities are to plug AI into the sort of, I guess, the entire sort of SIG intelligence lifecycle, or the Cybint intelligence lifecycle?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Rob talk to the SIGINT part of it, but I mean, in the agency, I mean, a lot of analysts, not the analysts that work for me in CCI, but outside of the cyber realm, were afraid they were going to be replaced by AI bots. And then they got their head around what it meant, and like, the easy sort of like biographical details on some world leader, and I have to write redo that report every month as things evolve. If you could take that off an analyst's plate and have them focus on much deeper intellectual activities, that is great. So I think AI is sort of a Rorschach test for a lot of people, but what it means for the workforce in a place like CIA is reducing workload and making humans more efficient. Same thing on the defensive cyber side, or in doing vulnerability research. I mean, if you can have AI tools execute that, frankly, as a former field CIA guy, if I could have had an AI tool write up some of my meetings so that I could go do more important things, I would have saved myself like maybe a year of my life.
It's so funny that you say that, because that's basically the only thing that I use AI to do is meeting summaries and notes. It's amazing. Because it writes up perfect notes, and then you just go through, correct the spelling of people's names, and call it a day.
And so and again, back to CIA field people, then you have those people with deep expertise in whatever area of the world they're serving in, deep language experience, that aren't wasting their time writing up things in the office. They're out, meeting sources, or if they're more senior in their career, meeting leaders of that country and advancing the ball on U.S. national security goals.
I imagine too that like just having some large language model trained on a bunch of intelligence would be very useful for analysts just to be able to ask it questions as well. Like, what do we know about this guy? Who are their associates? And, instead of having to enter in, something in a specially internally developed scripting language, they can just ask things questions. But again, this is a change in interface, isn't it? It's a productivity change, not it's not changing the information you have. It's just really about being more efficient with it. So just one last thing we wanted to talk about is this, I guess, how can startups get involved? How can startups help the IC? Because one of the things that, that's interesting about trying to serve intelligence agencies is their requirements are pretty opaque. Right? Like, it's not like you can just say, well, NSA is struggling with this particular technology requirement, so we're gonna raise a bunch of money and build this thing. So how can how could your former agencies go out to bright young things and get them to build things without sort of giving away too much information? Like, is this a problem for agencies like NSA and CIA?
Yeah, so Pat, it is, at least in the NSA ecosystem, a fairly insular and because it's the government bureaucratic process. But there is one easy button in the startup world, and that is In-Q-Tel. So NSA literally gives In-Q-Tel the list of problems that it's hoping to have solved. And they then canvass the venture world and do annual conferences and other venues where they talk about what we're looking for and kind of mine and harvest those needs.
Yeah, and obviously as the CIA guy, In-Q-Tel's been a godsend throughout my career, but I didn't really get it until I retired 18 months ago, and then got very involved in the VC world. Spent a lot of time with In-Q-Tel, also spent a lot of time with the private equity world. And I'm astounded with the innovation in that entire ecosystem. And you see it at RSA, you see it at various conferences, across the country. And niche companies that are set up on a shoestring, and then you get a viable product, and then there becomes a use case in the Intel community, and then that company takes off and becomes quite profitable. I think it is a very healthy cycle in the United States, and I doubt there's any country in the world that quite has that innovation cycle. So I'm very confident that there's probably someone in this room, definitely someone who's listening to your podcast, Pat, who's going to invent the next amazing thing for the intelligence community, and maybe it will be incubated by In-Q-Tel, maybe it will be incubated by one of the venture capital firms represented here. But I'm very confident that whatever that technology is, it's going to be invented in the United States or maybe Australia.
There you go. In-Q-Tel actually do have an office here, funnily enough, so for quite a few years now. But look, I think we're going to wrap it up now and move to questions, which will not be part of the recording. Fantastic to see you both. Again, I'm very sad I can't be there. Rob, Joyce, Andy Boyd, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Pat.
Thanks, Pat.